Hello and welcome to the Deep Track Podcast, an exploration of watches, trends, and culture with a few adventures along the way. I'm your host, Blake Bettner. I'm very excited about today's episode. I'm sure I say that a lot, but I really am excited about today's. I've got my good friend Chris Sohl on the podcast, and we are going to talk about diving, about scuba diving. Chris is largely responsible for bringing me into the world of scuba diving. He's the one that not only encouraged me to get my open water certification, but also guided me along the way, not just in terms of who to seek training from, but also in terms of the kinds of gear that I should pursue and try using. And it's just been a really incredible experience over the past 6 or 7 months since I've become certified. I've had the pleasure of diving with Chris down in Florida around the launch of the Tudor FXD Black, which was actually the impetus that inspired me to get my diver certification in the first place. So we are going to talk about all of that, using our watches while we're diving, diving in general, what it's like getting trained, and what to expect in a few of these realms. So you can find more of Chris Sohl over at the Grey NATO Slack channel. If you're not a supporter of the Grey NATO, I would strongly suggest that you go and do that, which will give you access to the Grey NATO Slack. He is a moderator there. One quick note before we get into the episode: the Deep Track is now on YouTube. I published our first video review of the new Rolex Daytona, reference 126500. We'll do my best to get videos up and published weekly, so please consider going over to the Deep Track on YouTube and subscribing, or at least checking out the Daytona review. I hope you enjoy it. All right, without further ado, let's get to this week's episode. All right, Chris Sohl, welcome to the Deep Track Podcast. Thanks so much for being here, my friend. I appreciate you making time for me.
Buddy, it's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So you are the person responsible for getting me a little bit further into diving. Well, I should say into diving at all. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. Chris, maybe introduce yourself, tell us why that is, and let us know a little bit about who you are.
Sure. So I am a guy that really likes watches and diving, that's for sure. I'm a family man. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, or Louisville for anybody that lives outside the state. It's a very landlocked place to be such an avid diver, but I think that makes it all the better. So I got into watches and diving around the same time, definitely, through our friends, the Grey NATO, and I've been, just really digging this watch scene for a long time alongside diving, and one thing leads to another. Just this community is a wonderful place. So many of our mutual friends um, have been great to meet and hang out with, especially at various events like the Wind Up Fair, which is where we met last year. And
Mm-hmm.
I was blessed to be able to coordinate this little event we've called Wind Up in a Lake for a couple years now. And you were on that boat and we struck up a conversation. I think it's pretty common that if you've known me for more than like 30 minutes, I'm going to say something like, hey, have you tried scuba diving? Trying to convince everybody that I know that this needs to be a scuba renaissance throughout the world. And I'm very gratified that that's something that really stuck with you. And man, the way that you have really jumped in and grabbed a hold of the sport is inspiring to me. I wish that everybody would come at it with that gusto.
Oh man, it's been a lot of fun, and I tell you, the setting was. So it's not like we were just like chatting in a bar or something talking about
Sure.
diving. We were literally on the boat, so I got to see everybody going down. And this was in Lake Michigan, diving a wreck not too far off the coastline of Chicago, there in the distance. Beautiful blue water, and of course, a boat full of some longtime friends and some new friends. So this was my first time observing divers like up close and personal in their space.
Yes.
And I tell you, it was like an immediate like, oh, I wish I could go down there and see what they're seeing and experience what they're experiencing. So there's something really infectious about just being there and seeing all this happen and take place. So of course, I'm a pretty curious guy, so I started asking you, I think probably ridiculous question after ridiculous question about it.
Great
And
questions.
and lo and behold, a few months later, I had my dive cert and my open water dive certification, and then I was able to go diving with you in Florida for the launch of
Yes.
the Tudor FXD, the black one, which I think we're all pretty fond of. It seems to be a pretty popular watch, especially on the Grey NATO Slack. I see it posted there quite often, which you are a moderator of, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, yeah. So I have the utter privilege to help kind of shepherd that community. It was something that I had prodded, especially Jason, for many years. Hey, we should really get a Slack, man. And I didn't want to say, but I can help. I didn't want to presume, but I feel very lucky to have been given that opportunity, and it's just such a wonderful place. We call it the
Yeah.
nicest corner on the internet. Truly, those guys set the tone. The culture is always from the top down, right? And that place really
Yeah.
reflects a great place to hang out and have some friends.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not supporting the Great NATO, definitely go do so, and it gives you access. Even if you don't like James and Jason, you hate the podcast, whatever, just do it to get access to the to the Slack group. It's a great group of people there. I've gone to some of the meetups that they have, and there's meetups all over the place that they have. So really great group of guys, and you keep us all in line. So nice job
The
there.
easiest job in the world.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk more diving and get into some of this stuff a little bit deeper. Before we do, it's usually a tradition to do a wrist check here. Chris, what are you wearing today?
Sure. So at least on my left wrist, I am wearing a Hoyer 3000 Professional. So it's a
Oh wow, that is
pre-tag,
really cool.
yeah, boxy looking thing. Somebody reminded me recently that this was the non-chronograph version of what is being worn in Die Hard. So this is of that era. I guess it
Okay,
puts it around 84 or 85. And
okay,
this watch was one that I saw in the collection of a buddy of mine, Greg Lowry, father of the infamous Ben Lowry, good
yeah,
friends.
yeah, yeah. Our buddy Ben.
Yep, yep.
Shout out
So
to Ben and happy belated birthday, by the way. I think it was his birthday the
yes,
other day. Yeah.
100%. So Ben and his dad are just the salt of the earth, and Greg lives in Chicago, and so we, got to visit them during the last wind up fair, and I remembered that he had this watch, and it's just perfect. It's like 37.5 millimeters. It's quartz, but it's thin as all get out, and it just has loads of personality. I've got that
Yeah,
on a
love it.
Cincy Strapco, stripey NATO, one of the the ribbed kind. Those are great.
Yeah,
And then on
yeah.
my right wrist, I'm a double wrister. Got the Apple
Okay.
Watch going. So
Okay, that's cool. I've noticed a few people that do this now, and I'm like, is this, is it double wristing if, with the app, with the smart device, which serves kind of like a slightly different function set, right?
I think
It's got
so.
a very different tool set, obviously.
Yeah, I
It
think
still
so.
tells the time and all that kind of stuff, but it's, have you been like that for a long time?
I started right at the beginning of 2020, and it helps so much with general fitness. Being able to
Mm,
incentivize myself with, calories burned means more calories that you can consume up to your budget.
there you go.
It was a game changer,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
And I do get a lot of comments about the double wristing. I always try to answer, while both watches tell me the time, this one tells me I'm fat, and this one tells me I'm broke because I
And
spent all my money on cool watches.
that's
So,
good. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
I like that. I like that. So I'm wearing anybody who's been around the community for a while might remember this one. It's a Prometheus Ocean Diver,
oh,
um, which is I don't know if this brand is still around anymore, but this was I've had a long time thing. I think it's a common thing in our community that like there's a certain style or type of dive watch that's kind of pulled us all into
yes.
this. The SKX 007s and that kind of thing, or 013 if you're that kind of person. This was one of the dive watches that I was always kind of a sucker for an internal rotating bezel. With just it's not a compressor case, but some people refer to it as that compressor case style because
Right.
it has the two crowns along the right hand side and the top one adjust the internal bezel there. This is just from yeah, just a normal civilian walking around on land. It's fun to use and like look at. I've
Absolutely.
not tried to dive in one with the internal rotating bezel. I can't imagine it would be very practical.
Not
Though.
super much, no. In fact, that was when we were doing Wind Up in a Lake this past year in 23. We had the Benris Ultra Deep, which is also another incredible watch. Uh,
Hmm.
that is a super compressor style case, and yeah, you got gloves on in the Great Lakes. It's doable, but not as practical.
Yeah, not as practical, but that's all right. These things are all about the experience, and that's a watch that has a great experience and story to it. Of course, this one does as well, even though it doesn't have quite as much of the history there. All right, so and the other thing while we're on watches that I kind of wanted to kick off with before I get into like how you got into diving. If I'm not mistaken, you've only ever worn a single watch diving, or you always have the same watch on you on every dive, and I know you've got like hundreds of dives on you, so every single one of them you've had this same singular watch, and
That is
it's
true. That
okay.
is true. Well, I'll accept hundreds of dives. I'm just shy of 200. So to be fair,
Okay.
um,
Okay.
I have
That's still a lot of
worn.
dives.
Yeah, it's I've had a wonderful time accruing those, but I still have a lot to learn and a long way to go. I can say that for sure. Um,
Always, yeah.
but thanks. So my brother gave me this second gen Seiko Black Monster. It was a watch that I think you referred to, the watches that pull us in initially to this hobby. And the Black Monster always seems to be one of those very polarizing things, especially from that era, that you either love it or you hate it. And a lot of times it's both. You hate it until you absolutely fall head over heels. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what happened with this thing. And um, so this sort of this story dovetails with how I got into diving, and so we can talk about that in a
Oh,
bit. But
perfect. Yeah.
like, so my family and I would spend the summer in like the southern tip of New Jersey, and only in the last 7 8 years had I been into watches, and so I started paying attention to watches that were available in that place because a sense of place and being connected to that and having an object that represents that, I think that's a beautiful thing. And so
Hmm.
a Black Monster caught my eye, but I was still really new into the watch scene. I didn't understand how like ADs versus gray dealers versus street price like worked, and so I tried to lowball them. It didn't work, and I didn't end up with the watch basically. And so my brother like comes through huge at Christmas time that year, completely unexpected, and gives me the Black Monster. And
Oh wow.
I have honored that by you know that very next year, I was getting into open water certification, and every single dive I've ever done, whether training, whether in the ocean, in a pool, if I'm breathing through a regulator, I am wearing this watch. And
Oh wow.
it's been really cool to be able to be more than a one watch guy above the water, even though I collect pretty much exclusively dive watches because I think that's like the soul of the object really speaks to me. But yet, every single one of my actual adventures is baked into this one piece, and it's
Okay.
very special.
So it's like a totem in that sense that represents a lot to you. And I noticed this when I saw it. The strap on it is really unique and interesting. And whenever I ask you about it, like I don't have like a notebook or anything, and I never write it down, so I always like forget. But I love the strap setup that you have on this thing.
It
So
is
tell
great.
me about this thing. I'll link a picture or something to this thing if I can find one. It has like an extension, like a spring loaded
Yep.
clasp or
Yep.
something like that.
Yep. So credit where it's due again to our buddy Ben Lowry. This was his sort of like discovery, although he would pass along the credit to Navy SEAL Dave Hall, who
Mm.
he's had a relationship with and has written about in the past. So, according to Mr. Hall, this is the strap that actual legit combat divers would wear back in the day.
Okay.
And all it
Okay.
is a very simple piece of Velcro that is attached to this maybe even a little bit over engineered spring loaded clasp thing. But, the simplicity of the Velcro bit going around the extendy part makes for, the easiest and cheapest execution of like the Doxa Expandro concept or the Tudor, floating clasp concept.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's exactly what it is. And it's hyper practical. It
Mm.
makes for a great in water watch strap, so long as the
Uh,
Velcro, holds up. And if it wears out, no big deal. It costs $7 from Divers Direct, and we can definitely put a link in the show notes to that or whatever. But
Divers Direct. Now I have
yeah,
it recorded, so I can I can try and
there you go.
snag one for some of my divers. I love Velcro straps, and I'm a big proponent of them. And even if a brand is selling nicer high end watch or whatever. There's a practical element, and I've seen them executed on high end watches, and they still work. I don't know, just really well to me. I like the kind of mix of high low, but there's something you can't beat the practicality in terms of like micro adjusts of
Yeah,
a Velcro strap.
it's
Uh,
very true.
and yeah, I know the NATOs are certainly practical as well. I've gone diving once in kind of like just a ratty old NATO, and it was in a 7 mil suit, and with the compression as I got deeper, I looked down and I noticed the thing is kind of just like
Yeah,
dangling off, and I was like, oh, I can't, I couldn't like unhook the thing and retighten it
yeah,
and all that. And of course, it was like an old NATO because I thought that was cool, and it is cool and it looks cool, but it's practically compromised, of course, in
yeah.
this kind of a situation. So it was one of those where I just like struggled to, secure it in any way I could, just so I didn't lose the watch. And that was the last time that came off like immediately, of that watch. And
Yeah.
I've gone diving in a few different watches, but they've all been Tudor Pelagos watches. So the 39 and then both of the FXD colorways are the only ones, and most of them have been done in the FXD black. And it was just kind of me getting into it for the explicit purpose to go on that trip and go diving on the trip. That watch kind of immediately has a really special place to me. So maybe, a couple years later down the road, maybe that will still be the only watch that I've ever gone diving in, just because of that. Like, it
Yeah.
resonates with me for that. And it just happens to be a great watch underwater. It's
It's
easy to
so
make
good.
like quick adjustments. It's the contrast holds up
Yes.
in every setting that I've been in. It's just one of those watches that works, exactly as you want it
Uh-oh.
to, and as you
Losing you.
need it to. Um, and I'm curious to get your take on this as someone who has a lot more experience diving. I think you hear a lot of people talk about, well, divers don't really wear watches anymore, and they don't really need them or use them. Do you crank the bezel, before you plop over into the water, or reference the time, or use it in any way, shape, or form functionally when you dive?
You put me on the spot here, but I'll be honest with you. I don't. I just don't. I
Okay.
use the watch on the boat to know what time it is, to know, is my wife awake yet so I can text her and say, I love you before I jump in the water. I use it
Yeah.
to know roughly, the actual time of day because that's how I'm used to using it. And I use my dive
Hmm.
computer for everything else. Would I like to be the guy that spins the bezel before I jump in just so I have a worst case scenario backup? Yeah, I think that is a good idea. It's certainly no argument that it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
But I'm usually so excited to just get underwater that I completely forget about that, and I know my
Yeah.
computer is going to work automatically the way that it needs to work.
Yeah.
That's I'll be very clear for any experienced divers in the audience. That's probably not the best mindset to have. Like, you got to be prepared. Two is one, one is none. I
Yeah.
recognize that fully, but to be perfectly vulnerable and honest, no, I'm generally not using it. Now, I have timed a few safety stops with it, especially like if my computer doesn't require a safety stop, but I want to take one anyway. I'll just spin the
Hmm.
bezel real quick, and that's nice.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, just like you mentioned about the Pelagos FXD, I mean, that watch's contrast is like a clinical execution of like perfect visibility, legibility. It's so good.
Yeah.
The Seiko, for me, runs a close second. I mean, just the teeth shaped markers in the loom, it's awesome. So it's
Yeah.
been really fit for purpose, but I generally don't employ that purpose underwater myself. And now I don't found on anybody who does, though, because these objects are romantic things, and I've already talked about baking my experiences into it. Um,
Hmm.
and I will say that there are other times, like when we did the FXD dive in Florida, that I had the FXD on my wrist, but I had my monster in my pocket, right? So I just want to make
So
sure
it's
that
still
it's
there.
it's with me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So you still get to experience other watches diving. It's not like that's the only watch that you've had the experience of
Every
diving
now
in.
and then,
So
every now and
every
then,
now
yeah.
and then,
If it merits it,
um, if it merits it, yeah. That was a fun trip. This was, of course, around, as I mentioned, the release of the FXD Black, and Tudor was kind enough to have a bunch of us out and go dive hovercraft, the Jeff A.
Yes.
Hovercraft out there, which was which was a really interesting experience. A little bit deeper than I think I was realizing that it would be, but it's okay. I feel like there's a lot of there's a lot of margin, safety margin built in. I've
Yes.
come to realize with all the stuff that they talk about in dive when you're learning how to dive, which is of course a good thing. Um, but this was my first kind of proper dive off of my open water certification, and it was a really fun experience to me, mostly because all the diving that I had done had been in the New York area, in water that is slightly cold and gets really cold under under a thermocline. So this was my first experience really diving in water that I didn't need to have a dive any exposure suit on.
Bath water, man.
It's
Yeah.
usually a 3 millimeter or 7 millimeter, and it was like a night and day difference. My first open water dives were in quite cold water up in northern New York in Lake Minnewaska, and I'll never forget like the feeling what that was like, and getting out of that dive and thinking like, what am I doing? What am I doing here? This is crazy. And then contrasting that with the experience of being in the warmer water. And I brought my suit, and you guys all looked at me like, you're crazy. You're not going to need that. Just put on put on a rash guard and a pair of shorts, and you'll be fine. And off I went. And it felt like the difference between like driving a semi truck down the road and driving like a Lamborghini down the road, like how you could move and
Yes.
control, is like it all started to click. And I was like, oh man, yes. But I'm glad I had the experience of learning how to do all that stuff, learning what does controlling my buoyancy feel like in a giant 7 millimeter suit with a hood on. And so it all kind of like really fell into place, diving in warm water. And now like all I want to do is dive in in warmer in warmer water.
Yes.
Now, I know that there are a lot of different types of diving here, and you suggested to me when I was learning how to dive to look into a NAUI program,
Mhm.
and I thought it might be good for you to maybe explain a little bit like what that is compared to like PADI, and if there's other certification bodies, I guess, out there, regulatory bodies. I don't know what you'd call these what you call these things.
Sure, yeah. And before I get into those details, I do want to just generally brag on you and say that you really did it right, man. Like I think that you provided a great model in the way that you described it as, learning behind the wheel of a semi truck. Like you were learning how to parallel park a semi before you went and drove a Lamborghini. And I really appreciate that approach because it means that you have to truly pay attention and you have to truly love it to, want to keep progressing. And I think that's awesome. So, yeah, you're leading me into controversial territory with like Nowie versus Patty versus
Okay.
SSI a bit, but that's okay. I will gladly provide my,
Sure.
humble opinion and perspective. But everybody is biased by default, generally speaking, because of who they originally were certified with, right? You can't really avoid that.
Mm.
So the Louisville Dive Center is, while I was, learning, was primarily a NAUI shop, and NAUI stands for the National Association of Underwater Instructors, and it is one of the larger certifying agencies worldwide. But there are several of them. You have PADI, which is the largest by a good margin, which stands for Professional Association of Dive Instructors. You have other agencies that are like geographically based. So like you might have the British Sub-Aqua Club, or you might have, I forget the name of the one in France. The YMCA will even certify you. There's a lot of different ways that you can
Oh wow.
learn, and they are all the same core material. Like I want to say that very loud and clear. Like the basics that you will learn, the basic physics, the basic safety rules, the general redundancy, the content is all the same. And the difference between the certification agencies, while there is some nuance that I'll talk about in a bit, it's a very, very distant second to the quality of your instructor. So what I always recommend to somebody who's looking to get
Mm.
into diving is go down to your local dive shop and just start asking questions. Ask a lot of questions. Are they patient with answering those questions? Are they friendly? Are they excited about getting you involved? And can they introduce you to the instructor that would actually be doing your course? Because that is 99% of it,
Yeah.
honestly. How passionate they are, how um, focused on the right principles they are, because at the end of the day, this is still a business. People still need to make money, and volume matters, and so you're still looking for somebody whose passion shines through in that scenario, and is wanting to really guide you along the right way, and support you in a safe, and friendly manner. That's what I would say about that. So I had a great experience
Yeah.
with NAUI.
Yeah.
I do think that there's some nuance in the way that they teach some things. I have, a buddy of mine, Michael Pandolfo, who went through Patty for his nitrox certification, for example, and then he kind of asked us some questions to fill in the gaps that he felt that he had. And my buddy and I, who had gone through now, we were able to show him like the textbook of where we got this, and he was like, "Oh, that was very different for us." And so there are some differences, and I'm always going to be a fan of NAUI just because that's what I've continued to do. But comes down to your own dedication to it, and your instructor, and that's really what's important.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I had a really good experience with Naui as well because of the instructors really took it seriously, and I think really cared like how much I was getting into it, and cared how seriously I was taking it. So they held me to a very high standard, which I really appreciated. And you at once feel like you want to enjoy it, but also like take it very seriously. Um, so before we would start any dive, we would kind of stand there and look around and like fill out the sheet of like observing our surroundings, and kind of like planning, and all that kind of stuff. And they really kind of instilled a level of respect into me that I try to take into every single one of my dives now. And diving with other people has there's all kinds of different experiences out there. I guess I should say it that way.
Very true.
And and that's why I think it's all the more important that like you take it yourself seriously, and understanding like what you're getting yourself into, and feeling like you can either manage yourself or know when you're putting yourself in a situation that you don't want to be putting yourself into,
That's
in
so
being
true.
able to recognize it before you put yourself into that situation, right?
We've already used the analogy of learning to drive, uh, and uh, the whole idea of defensive driving applies the same with defensive diving. Like, you don't know who's just out here for a joyride and has no idea what they're doing. You don't know who's out here and who is
Yeah.
barely qualified. And you want to make sure that you are taking care of your stuff, but you've also got an eye on what everybody else is doing, because if there is an out of air emergency, you're the next closest regulator that they're going to grab, right? And I'm not saying that you have to be on edge all the time while you're diving, but it's important to recognize that not everybody is approaching this activity at this moment with the same dedication that you may be.
All right, so I think that's all really good advice. Another thing to keep in mind is there are a lot of different avenues that the divers can go down for things that they want to do. And when I opened up the NAUI kind of the e-learning portion of it, there's all these tiles of that you can shipwreck dive, ice dive, spear fishing, and all this kind of stuff. Do people need to know, well, this is what I ultimately want to do with it? Maybe it's just like a vacation thing that I do a couple times a year, or maybe it's something that I want to try and do a couple times a month, and really get into it there. And I know that this has a way of like pulling you in fast in ways that you might not be realizing
Yes, it
at the
does.
onset. Like, but what should people be aware of before they try to like go into this?
I mean, I think that it's a great thing for anybody to just go try it. And in fact, you don't even have to commit to a full open water certification. A lot of dive centers will have something called Try Scuba, where they'll just give you sort of a crash course of like an hour of, hey, don't do this, don't hold your breath. Here's a regulator. Go, kneel in the shallow end and breathe underwater for the first time, and that can be a life-changing experience. So, strongly recommend everybody to do
Yeah.
that. But once you're, committed to an open water certification, I mean, it is a wonderfully open-ended thing, just as you've illustrated. It's great for anybody who wants to just exclusively dive in the Caribbean on this, trip that they're taking to Turks and Caicos, and that's all they're interested in. Or if they want to explore shipwrecks off the coast of New Jersey, and dive a U-boat off the coast of North Carolina, or go explore, undiscovered shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. I mean, yeah, that's very shipwreck oriented. You can do a lot more than shipwrecks, but obviously that's one of the things that drives me. It's so open ended as
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
what you can do and what you can study and how you can grow. That's one of the things that I love most about this sport, is like it is a quest for proficiency and learning that is so like disconnected from normal life. These are skills that for the most part, practical application wise, you're never going to use it another way. Now, certainly it can apply to everyday life in terms of the ability to be calm, the ability to think ahead through any situation, the ability to be really aware of your surroundings
Yeah.
and aware of other people and helping them. But, just the learning itself has been so fulfilling to me in this. And I would, dare say it's been the same for you, the way that I've seen you really grab a hold of this and run with it. And so
Yeah.
I always recommend that, at least if you did open water and you liked it, um, there is so much more there that you don't want to cut yourself short. I really recommend that everybody checks out Nitrox, which effectively allows you to have a longer bottom time and or a bigger margin of safety while you're under the water.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also advanced open water certification, which really dials in some of the skills that you only learned how to crawl in open water. You're going to learn how to walk really effectively with advanced open water, and you can go deeper. You can dive at night when all the really cool critters come out. You can, orient yourself better. You can use different tools. Advanced open water to me is really where it's at. Is really where you come into your own as a diver and start to understand the different things that you can do and kind of how you want to grow. So um, I always recommend.
Yeah, that's it's interesting, and I think it's important to note too that there's a difference between just scuba and open water and advanced, and there are all these kind of variations, and I think there's maybe a conception that oh, you can just do this in like a quick weekend on your honeymoon and kind of get the basics down,
Yeah.
which is maybe true to some level. But there's so much more than that,
Yeah.
especially as you mentioned, like diving to any kind of depth and staying down there long
Yes,
enough and being, I mean, these are, this is a whole life support system.
it is.
And oftentimes like other people around you are reliant on you as you are on them. So, you really have to kind of have that understanding of, and it's as much a mind game, I feel like, as anything else.
Yeah.
And, as you mentioned, it really kind of hones in on how you're able to kind of remain calm and think through things without kind of freaking out, because when you're 40, 50, 60, 80 feet underwater, you can't just like pop up and bail. Like you like there are more things that you kind of really have to be thinking about and processing in a calm manner, otherwise things can go south like very very
That's
quickly,
very true. And you
which is
bring
never
up
a
an
good thing.
important topic that I forgot to mention, which is that a lot of times people do try to knock it out in a weekend at a resort in the Caribbean, and that can oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes end up in having such a bad experience that you never want to do it again. I have a buddy of mine who did this, and
Mm.
you hear it pretty commonly as a diver. Oh, I tried that once, it wasn't for me. Oh, well, what happened? We went down to this resort and they gave us rental equipment that was kind of janky and they didn't teach us how to use it. And so we were really stressed out and they loaded us down with a bunch of lead weight and told us not to hold our breath and threw us into the water. And I plummeted to the bottom of the
Oh,
ocean
geez.
floor and cut my chest on some coral. And that was it, man. Like, I was like, well, yeah, I can see why you never
Yeah.
would want to do that again. So
Ears
definitely,
pounding.
yes, exactly. Yeah. Go to a local reputable dive center to start your learning journey. Don't wait until you're already on vacation. That's a big tip that I can offer.
Yeah, I think that's a huge. It's something that obviously you have to respect, and honestly, like you don't really know how your body's going to react and how you're going to react to the changes happening to your body
Yeah.
as you experience the pressures that are starting to be put on your body. Um, right up, I mean, 15, 20 feet, you'd be surprised that it starts to, oh, I can feel this, and then you slow things down and try to equalize and all that. So it's like it's rough, and I feel like that's the kind of thing that you have to like really, it's hard to teach, right? Like you just have to experience it and feel it and like trust the process. um, and that equalizing, I think, is a big thing, and I've experienced like where depending on the visibility of the water, where I get like vertigo
Yeah.
bouts where it's, if there's not much visibility, you kind of get this like where your head is
You
spinning a
really
little
do.
bit, and but knowing that you can kind of just keep your body like, okay, well, your instincts kind of kick in and you can't freak out
Yeah.
about it. You kind of like let it work its course, or go ascend just a little tiny bit, or whatever it is that you need to do. Like that kind of stuff just kicks in as second nature.
Yeah.
but there it can be a jarring experience, I feel like.
It can be, the
For
only
people.
thing that you have to fear underwater is fear itself, not sharks. It's probably the most common question that I get asked is, do you ever see sharks? It's like, yeah, sometimes. They're kind of skittish, honestly. But
Sure.
what really threatens a diver underwater is panic. So being prepared, learning what you're gonna do, planning your dive and diving your plan. That's the mantra of every diver. And having
Yeah.
contingencies for when that plan doesn't go exactly like you thought it would, because it never does. Just having, that
Yeah.
mental preparation and mental fortitude to be able to handle whatever comes at you. That's one of the reasons this discipline is so attractive to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's another reason I think where it's attractive to people like you and me. We like to tinker, we like gear.
Oh
There's a lot
yeah.
of really cool gear
Oh baby.
in doing this as well, and that's of course like another big part of it. Is kind of learning all of your gear like the back of your hand, really, because if you're trying to kind of dive, you're playing and you're stressing about where all your stuff is clipped in or dangling off or whatever it is, then you're going to have a bad time pretty quickly. But how important is it to? I guess not how important, but you mentioned like you can get into where you're renting all these different things and all the setups could be different maybe every single time, and then you realize like, oh, maybe I like this setup much better, and it's like a totally different experience. So my first few couple of dives were in the vest style, and then you recommended the backplate and wing, and then once I made that switch, it was like again another one of those kind of like night and day differences of where I felt like I had a lot more control over what I was doing with myself, and kind of setting up my kit or my system exactly how I wanted it set up. So how many different like options are there for people looking to get into this? And it's not like you have to buy your own gear, but at least having a familiarity with what you work best with, I think, is an important thing, right?
Yeah, like anything, once you reach a certain level of commitment, you're gonna want your own kit anyway. But it's an extra good idea, to, just like you said, be familiar enough with your own kit, that you do know it with your eyes closed, so that you can handle anything that comes your way in a zero visibility situation, so that you can reach any of your tools that, might be stowed on your body without having to like search for them or pat yourself down. If you're entangled in some fishing line that you can't see because it's behind you, and you're starting to feel that, panic welling within you, and you need to tap that down while also calmly reaching for the knife or the shears that you know exactly where they are, to go take care of that problem calmly. So having your own kit that you have, strongly familiarized yourself with is definitely the ultimate goal, but you have to get there. You have to be able to try different things. As a new open water diver, you're most likely going to start out diving in a jacket style BC, which sort of wraps all the way around you and inflates like a life vest. So it gives you this nice upright position in the water that feels very good to those of us who spend most of our time upright, but underwater, it's much more efficient to be in a horizontal trim position, right? And so the backplate and wing that you mentioned is something that can really help out with that. And it's also a really modular system. And so a lot of divers, that accrue a lot of experience end up moving in that direction. And that's always something that I recommend starting with sooner rather than later, because, it's one of those things that the data has sort of proven out in the long run that it has specific advantages, that are really worthwhile. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not okay to dive in, a jacket style BC, or whatever configuration you want. One of my favorite phrases about diving is that there's no scuba police, right? Like, this is not a heavily regulated activity where somebody's going to come in and tell you, hey, you can't do that way. It's an incredibly open ended and freeing pursuit where whatever you want to bring to bear to make this happen, as long as you're meeting the bare minimum, like I've dived with, an old timer who is diving on tables. He's planning his dive on dive tables beforehand, and that's what he's going to execute. And there's no one there to say like, hey, you can't do this. It is very, it's a self-sufficient activity. Now, you shouldn't be diving with a buddy unless you're solo certified, right? But, beyond that, you are very much responsible for your own safety, your own plan, and your own execution of the dive. And of course, there's, with a reputable operation, there's also going to be dive masters there in the water to help out with that too. But yeah,
Yeah.
knowing your gear and having something that you can definitely rely upon and you know the history of, it's life support equipment, man. From your dive computer to your regulator, especially those two pieces, while they are arguably the most expensive, they are definitely the most important for your safety. So, you know, it's like my dad used to say
Yeah.
with a motorcycle
Yeah.
helmet, "Oh, that's a great $100 motorcycle helmet. Do you have $100 head?" It's like, no, my head is worth a little bit more to me than that. So,
Yeah.
definitely recommend investing
Yeah.
what you can.
I love it. So um what are you working on right now? I know we mentioned that there you can go kind of as, no pun intended, as deep as you want here in this with the kinds of like in-depth and technical certifications that you can get. So I know that you have quite a few of these under your belt. Is there anything you're working on right now or working towards, or any kind of certifications that you're working towards?
Yeah, definitely. Not actively at the moment, but I'm always, trying to find out what the next thing is, right? So the most recent thing that I did with
Oh, sure.
my good dive buddy Tim Edlin, he is the other half of my dive team and has been that way for several years. Shout out to Tim. We recently did Intro to Tech through the Louisville Dive Center, and that was something that was new for the shop. So our instructor kind of piloted this course with us and took us through it. So this was done through not NAUI but TDI, so Technical Diving International, and that's a whole. It's almost like starting over, because the principles that they teach you in open water, the fundamentals apply, but the safety buffers that you referred to earlier are different. Like we're coming at it from a very raw
Yeah.
mathematical, like physics based perspective, because we're not here to just acknowledge the guardrails and have a great time and sort of just go down when we go down and come up when we run out of air. Instead, the goal of technical diving is to plan every last detail of the dive. How long are you, or how deep are you going to go? What are you going to do when you're there? How long are you going to be at that depth? Are you going to change depth? How long are you going to be at that depth? When are you going to come up? And what are your contingencies for every step along that way? And also,
Mm.
you're within technical diving. If you're planning to that detailed level, you can do what are called decompression dives, where you're staying down long enough that you can't just come right back up in an emergency. You may have heard of getting the bends, or decompression sickness. That is, without going too in depth, it's basically like when you have a soda bottle on the counter and you crack that cap, the change in pressure causes it to go, and you can see the bubbles get bigger and form and rise to the surface. Well, if you come up from diving too quickly, after you've been down a certain amount of time, that's what happens to your blood, and that's real bad for you, and that's not what you want. So,
Yeah.
you want to avoid DCS with thorough planning, but DCS is generally confined outside of what you're allowed to do as a recreational diver. But once you start to enter the realm of technical diving, you can address that risk directly and mitigate it through planning and execution of your dive. So, Intro to Tech
Mm.
basically just establishes all the stuff that I just talked about there, and prepares you for the next step that I'm wanting to take, which is called ANDP, which stands for Advanced Nitrox and Decompression Procedures, which basically allows you to become like a full-fledged
Yeah.
technical diver, conduct decompression dives, which I can't yet do. And I think it establishes a new floor of 150 feet that you can safely dive to within your training, which is currently for recreational
Okay.
diving, which I'm still at, is 130 feet. So yeah, that's what's next for us. It's
130 feet.
daunting, but
Okay.
it's a great challenge.
You mentioned you're a family man. How does your family feel about all this?
That's a really great question. I appreciate that. I love my wife so much for what she puts up with, and also Tim's wife is incredible, and we get to go on a lot of adventures together. I would say the fact that we have each other to rely on, as good friends who trust one another very well, means a lot to them, and so. The fact that we take it as seriously as we do, and we really go all in on the study, and we keep each other sharp that way. Iron sharpens iron, as it is said.
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes all the difference. And if I was doing this solo, it'd be a much different reception. But like anything in
Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
there's risk in everything. It's all a matter of how you approach it and what you're doing to mitigate it. There's risk to sitting on the couch, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting to hear. You talk about some of these things, and the more you learn, the more you realize that there's this like gulf of things that start to open up to you, right? The things that you don't know that you don't know, and then you start to get a glimpse of all the things that you don't know
Yeah.
about this, and it becomes this whole world of really just incredible, I guess, people and things that you can kind of like put yourself through and learn, that not just for like the personal gratification or anything, but there's something more to it, and I think there's something very immensely satisfying about achieving some of these things and showing yourself that you can do it. Even at the just open water level or an advanced open water, and in every step of the way, it's like a wow, I can't believe I just did that. Or you look back on some of the things that happen and the experiences that you open yourself up to, are just incredible. So, is there any like specific types of dives that you're looking for, that you're like training toward
Mm.
doing? Like, oh, I know there's some great wrecks at like these kinds of depths, but I know I need like X amount of training to do this to go and really fully experience it, right?
Yes, definitely. One of the like niches of diving that really calls to me strongly is Jersey wreck diving, and I say Jersey wreck diving because it's really its own community. It is its own sphere within the broader world of diving. If you've never
Hmm.
read Shadow Divers, that is my favorite book, and I strongly recommend it. I was born in Jersey. I lived there until I was about 9 years old in '94, but then we still continued to go back there every summer. And so it's a big part of who I am, just that part of the world. And I always grew up wondering on the beach, what is out there? What is beneath that cold blue gray water? I just want to go see it one day, and that's part of how I, got into it. And my very first dive out of certification, like yours, was in Florida, which was amazing. I was very lucky to be able to make that happen right off the coast of Atlantic City, even though I was still in Kentucky at the time. So, um,
Wow.
to me, the way that Jersey
Huh.
rec culture is sort of it's a relic. Not a lot of dive cultures still think about things the way they do, and there's even more of a focus on self sufficiency. A lot of times they view your dive buddy as the most dangerous thing underwater. They make everybody dive with a pony bottle, for example. I mean, everybody. It's
Oh,
incredible.
sure.
Um,
Really?
so yeah,
Huh.
I'm trying to train
Wow.
more for technical diving capability that will allow me to accompany, um, you know, one of my favorite shops, Atlantic Divers, out of Cape May, on some of the more advanced stuff that they do. But um, yeah, it's an incredibly deep, again, no pun intended, scene to get in on, and it's something that I'd really like to grow into more, and
Yeah.
get more training from it. If I could get training from Gene and Atlantic Divers, that would be a real bucket list item there. That guy has dived with Chatterton and Kohler and Gary Gentile and
Hmm.
all kinds of heroes of that era. It's very, very cool stuff to me.
Well, that's just incredible. Yeah, it's there's so much more to pull you in, and I feel like the community is a big part of that, and it feels like the community around scuba diving in particular is really thriving and growing. I joined the scuba subreddit, and all the people that I see posting there and their dive experiences and asking for advice, and it's very active. And then of course, knowing some of the people that I've really had the privilege of getting to know, alongside yourself, has really just kind of cemented this is a place that I really like, feel good about being in. These are really good people, and maybe I don't know how far I'll end up pushing myself in that realm, but at least like being able to go and experience some of these things with you guys has really just been an honor, and as it has been to chat with you today, Chris. So I really appreciate your time. Where can people go find or more of you? Are you on social media, or should people just come and join the TGN Slack?
Oh yeah, great question. And thanks so much for having me, Blake. I'm not on Instagram as much as I used to be, but you can find me at Sohl, just my last name, Sohl. Feel free to hit me up there. Social media was never the same for me after watching The Social Dilemma, to be honest with you. Like, I'm trying to redeem the time that I've given up to all of the social media platforms into something
Yeah.
real, which is real relationships, which is why I feel so honored by the connection that we've been able to make and with others in this community. It's been incredibly fulfilling for me to move in that direction. But yes, I definitely recommend that everybody jump on the Grey NATO Slack community. It is the best little corner of the internet, and we would love to have you. The amount of diversity of knowledge and skills and amazing watches that are on that platform
Yeah.
are just so great.
Yeah.
So come on in, everybody. The water
Yeah.
is fine.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, thanks again for being here. It's been a huge pleasure to chat diving. We'll have to do it again sometime,
I
and
would love to.
or maybe talk about some of the upcoming dives that we have planned, or recap some of the fun dives that we've had, and talk about some of our experiences a little bit more. So I appreciate you tuning into this episode. The Deep Track is now on YouTube, by the way, as of this week. So you can go check us out over on YouTube. I'll leave a link to that down below. Hopefully, we'll soon have some dive videos there. I think there's an ice diving convention or meetup in Minneapolis that's happening relatively soon. So we'll see if we can swing up there and at least cover it. I don't know if we'll be in the kind of shape to get my
You
ice
got this,
diving
Blake. You got
certification.
this.
All right, that's our show for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, take care.